Good evening from New York. It took all of 3 days for smooth customer, political veteran Rick Perry to say something odious. Not just odious to me, not just odious to liberals, but thuggish and odious to anyone, even Mr. Karl Rove. We'll show you what Rove said about Perry in a minute. But first, here's what Perry said at a meet and greet session with voters in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, last night when he was asked about the Federal Reserve.
Oh, the Federal Reserve. I'll take a pass on the Federal Reserve right at the moment, to be real honest with you. I know there's a lot of talk and what have you about them. If this guy prints more money between now and the election, I don't know what y'all would do to him in Iowa, but we would treat him pretty ugly down in Texas. I mean, printing more money to play politics at this particular time in American history is almost treacherous or treasonous, in my opinion. Because all it's going to be doing, we've already tried this. All it's going to be doing is devaluing the dollar in your pocket.
All right. Well, there are a lot of ways to unpack that. The first is that this is a bit of ideological signaling to the most rabid factions in the farthest reaches of the right wing of the Republican Party, those who want us to return to the 19th century and the gold standard. The second way is as an interesting glimpse of just what kind of rhetoric Rick Perry thinks Republican voters want to hear. Tim Pawlenty left the race early because he could never quite viscerally connect to the backlash rage that is animating the Republican presidential primary. Rick Perry will not make that mistake. He's practically instructing the crowd to rustle up a lynch mob. The Perry campaign doubled down on that rhetoric today. Perry could not have been more clear that he had no regrets when he said this afternoon, quote, "Look, I'm just passionate about the issue, and we stand by what we said." Perry's spokesman told the Washington Post in a statement, quote, "The governor was expressing his frustration with the current economic situation and the out-of-control spending that persists in Washington. Most Americans would agree that spending more money is not the answer to the issues facing the country." Just a technical note here, the Federal Reserve is not in charge of spending anything. They print the money, but that's an aside. Karl Rove sharply criticized Perry's rhetoric last night on Fox News.
You don't accuse the chairman of the Federal Reserve of being a traitor to his country, of being guilty of treason, and suggesting that we treat him pretty ugly in Texas. That's not, again, a presidential statement.
Now, Rove and Perry have a little bit of history, and like nearly every member of the Bush camp, Rove has no love for Perry. But you know what? Good old Karl is still right. Joining me now is Alex Wagner, MSNBC analyst and Huffington Post reporter. Alex, how are you?
I am good, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Let me ask you this first. So I saw this quote last night as I was headed home, and I thought, oh, what a bad, gross thing to say. But I wasn't quite sure it was going to blow up. Are you surprised by how much it's sort of blown up today?
Yeah, for two reasons. One, I'm surprised that there is so much sort of bloodlust out there from the arch-conservative circles. And two, I'm really surprised that the establishment GOP, led by folks like Karl Rove, has reacted so swiftly in terms of condemnation. And I think that's testament to, A, the field being unsettled, but also this sense on the part of sort of veteran GOP strategists that Rick Perry may not be ready for prime time.
Right. And I think the other interesting thing here is that there's, the chief dynamic here, which is always the dynamic in primaries, but particularly right now in this early stage in the Republican Party circa 2011, is the most rabid voters are the ones they're pandering to. And, this kind of like Fed pandering, which is sort of obscure to the rest of the electorate, is super intense for them. Here's what Rove said about the Republican primary.
You don't want these candidates moving so right in the Republican primary that it becomes impossible for them to win the general election, because it'll become a self-defeating message in the primary. People want to win. They don't want somebody who goes so far to the extremes of either party that they lack a chance to carry a victory off in November.
Now, what's interesting to me is that the whole kind of selling point of the Perry candidacy was that he could be like super zealous and extremist and also electable. And Rove seems to be going right at that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think suggesting that you're going to go kneecap the Fed chair is like...
Well, other people in Texas might kneecap.
Also, let's get...
Also, let me just say something. In Texas, treating someone ugly means giving them a massage.
Sorry.
It's a little-known fact. Okay, continue.
My Texas, I won't even go there, Chris. Taking Alan Greenspan to the woodshed. The thing is, I mean, look... This is monetary policy, and there's some, you can have gripes about it, but I think the violence of this metaphor at a time, and fundamentally, just if you look at the clip, it's not like this seems like a seasoned sort of thought out talking point. This seems like an off the cuff remark. Perry is known to have this is a liability of his potentially, and I think that there's real concern that, oh my God, we can't control this guy. What does that mean for the long term, especially when you have people like Michelle Bachmann right at his heels, and it's going to be this tit for tat back and forth, shifting the magnetic poles of this GOP race far, far, far right.
I thought it was so interesting, the response when he said he stood by what he said today, because, and I think this will be the first sort of test, right? I talked to a Texas Democrat, longtime Texas Democrat yesterday. I was sort of calling around about Perry, and he said the thing about Perry is when he makes a mistake, he just owns it. He doubles down, he embraces it, and somehow this has worked for him throughout his entire Texas career, and now I think this is sort of the crucible for him in this first test.
Right. I mean, your spoken record is going to come back to haunt you on the national stage in a way that it does not when you're running for Texas governor, I think. There's a lot of argument. There's a piece in the New York Times today talking about Perry's legacy and sort of how much of that was an inherited good luck and how much he's going to have to prove that. And I think you have this kind of stuff, and then you have this question as to whether, he is a legitimate, his jobs policies, his economic policies in Texas were legitimate. And I think there's a cloud of uncertainty that hangs over him. And it's certainly not, it's not mitigated by the fact that he refuses to sort of dial back any of the rhetoric.
The other interesting thing to me about Perry is that everyone talked about him as sort of second coming of Bush, or like Bush but not as smart. People say things like that,
which is a terrifying prospect.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
there is something. I mean, what could go wrong when you elect a Texas governor, Republican Texas governor? No, but the interesting thing is. At one level, the Bush legacy has to deal with, I think, is a political liability, which is that if you look at the polling, people still remember just what George W. Bush did to the country.
Absolutely.
The other liability, the other Bush baggage he's carrying is that it's really interesting to see if the entire Bush camp is working behind the scenes and in front of the cameras on Fox News to destroy Rick Perry out of the gate. That's not nothing.
No, and again, it's like we know that there's historical sort of fisticuffs between the Bush and the Perry camps. The fact that Rove, again, is coming out so sort of vocally against him, I think, gives credence to the theory that they don't want him to be the nominee. Look, Ben Bernanke was an appointee of George W. Bush. Lest we forget.
Not only was he an appointee, he worked in the White House.
Exactly.
He was on the CEA. Inside the Bush White House.
This is a conservative guy. And I think that the other thing, and this is, I think, that it bears mentioning that, the Fed is supposed to exist independent of politics. Right. And for Perry to say that Obama basically has the Fed printing money for political gain, I think, not only is a wild distortion of what happens in our monetary policy, but it's an untruth that gets circulated among the American public, and it's really detrimental to the national conversation.
There's an amazing anecdote, I think it's in one of the Robert Caro books, about LBJ calling the Fed Reserve chairman into the Oval Office and literally getting up against him and pushing him into a wall to get him to print more money.
Getting ugly with him?
Not getting ugly, treating him kind of ugly, otherwise known as giving him a massage.
Full circle.
Alex Wagner of the Huffington Post and MSNBC, always a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Chris.